Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For 8 days now, Russia has been bombarding Ukrainian cities using its superior military equipment to target not just the Ukrainian forces but also innocent civilians. Their strategy and their weapons may be more sophisticated, but the will and the determination of the Ukrainian people is an enemy Russia finds difficult to conquer. The story today, ladies and gentlemen, is about resistance, not so much about Russia's onslaught. Putin's forces have not managed to make significant progress in the last 2 days. There is growing evidence that Ukraine is managing to inflict heavy losses on Russian forces as they try to advance deeper into the country. Russia's hope for a swift strike quashed by popular resistance. Take a look at how they're fighting the mighty enemy.
In the wee hours of February 24th, Russia launched the first airstrike against Ukraine. At about 3:20 a.m. is when the first missile struck and the Russian invasion had officially begun. But contrary to Russia's confidence, it's been a week since, and Ukraine is holding out. 24 hours after the invasion, Ukraine appealed to all able-bodied men to join the military at the front lines. And Ukrainians lined up to fight until their last breaths. Parliamentarians, models, and common citizens all picked up a gun to keep the enemy out. Such scenes are now common across Ukraine. Hundreds of civilians blocking the invaders from taking over the capital. Russian tanks captured, even taken for a joyride by some, just to add insult to injury. Ukrainian farmers seized and destroyed a Russian missile system. They even downed a Russian fighter jet. Their will, their spirit and grit are inspiring many across the globe who are now rushing in to help the metaphorical David in his fight against Goliath.
Україна вже зустрічає іноземних добровольців, які йдуть в нашу державу. Перші з 16 тисяч. Вони їдуть захищати свободу, захищати життя для нас, для всіх. І це буде успішно, і я в цьому впевнений. Іди домой, к себе домой, защищать своих русскоязычных людей. И не по всему миру, а у себя дома. Их там тоже немало. Около 150 миллионов.
At the receiving end of violence and mayhem, but humanity isn't lost. A Russian soldier comforted by the same people he was fighting against right after he surrendered. Russia is divided over this war, and so are their troops on ground. Perhaps fighting a war only one man believes in, and that may explain this Russian soldier's feelings towards his president.
Ты за эту ночь что-то переосмыслил? Конечно. Путин кто? Путин хуйло или не хуйло? Скажи мне прямо. Не слышу.
Хуйло.
Ты уверен в этом?
Я уверен.
Cities after cities fall into Moscow's grip, but Ukrainians are putting up a tough resistance, even stopping this 64-kilometer-long convoy of Russian tanks just outside of Kyiv. The world watches in awe the story of the underdog fighting till the last man is standing. Bureau Report, Times Now.
And even as two very important meetings are currently on, one in Belarus, where Ukrainians are meeting with the Russians to try and find a middle ground. On the other hand, there is the Quad meeting that's going on with Prime Minister Narendra Modi as part of it. And in this Quad meeting, India is the only country that has abstained in a vote against Russia at the United Nations. Two very important meetings, and to discuss and debate what happens next in ground zero in Ukraine, I'm joined by Tatiana Kukareva, journalist, joining me live from Moscow. Frank Wisner, former diplomat, and Vishnu Prakash, also former diplomat, joining me on the debate today. I want to ask you, Frank Wisner, many people today see the United States as a country that egged on Ukraine and then left them out to dry. How do you respond to the world looking at Ukraine today, where the civilians have come forward, blocked the enemy from entering Kyiv, blocked them from taking over the capital, but all they've got from the United States, from the Western countries, are some weapons and a whole lot of homilies. How do you explain the position that the United States has taken?
I'm very comfortable with the position the United States has taken. I believe we have mobilized an international coalition that you could have watched yesterday with the vote in the General Assembly. And that has brought enormous political pressure to bear on Moscow. Second, we have mobilized and been part of the mobilization of the Western Alliance to send a solid and continuing signal to Russia. Third, we have managed to field an unprecedented number of sanctions, economic sanctions against Russia, and made it very, very clear there is a price to be paid for its unwarranted aggression against Ukraine. I think we've done exactly the right thing. The President of the United States made it clear at the outset that we weren't going to go to war over Ukraine. But because we're not going to go to war does not mean we're passive. We're extremely active, and the shape of it is highly political. I think we've done a good job. As to the provision of weapons, that's an issue that is currently underway right now to provide the Ukrainians the ability to defend their own sovereignty. They want to fight, they deserve to fight, and they deserve to have weapons they can use for that fight. And the United States will be part of that provision. Weapons are coming in from Western Europe. Weapons are coming in to assist the Ukrainians. So to say that the Ukrainians have been left out to dry is bloody nonsense.
Well, Tatiana Kurkava, I want to ask you. The United States says it is behind Ukraine. It is drumming up international support against Russia. But it never said it would come out and participate in the war that Ukraine and Russia were going to go into. Do you think at this point in time, it is Ukraine which is being helped by United States and the European countries? Do you think Ukraine is alone? Or do you think it is embarrassment for Russia because on day 8, you haven't been able to take over Kyiv, and there is not just military pressure that's pushing back Russia, but it is also actually the civilians who've come up and decided to defend their capital, their motherland?
Good evening, Navika. I'll have to start with your second question and just ask you one simple thing. Do you really think that if Russia wanted to take Kiev, just take it simply by force, it wouldn't have done it by now?
What is stopping Russia? Because you're putting out your missiles, you're sending your troops. They've bombed hospitals, they've bombed nursing homes, they've bombed.
Look, again, allegations without proof. First of all, especially when we talk about hospitals plural, and nursing homes plural. Incredibly worrying allegations.
So you're saying there's one? You're saying there's one, not two?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that there are a lot of reports coming from the Ukrainian side that cannot be authenticated and will not probably be authenticated, in the weeks to come. In the meantime, the Russian military has said from day one that their number one goal is to avoid civilian casualties at all costs. You're a journalist. I'm a journalist. Have you ever, in your experience on television, seen a war where you see a lot of crying people, scared people, yes. You see explosions, but you don't see dead bodies, especially if you say that there are, and that what they're saying is there's thousands of dead bodies, there are thousands of killed Russians. They're showing Russian soldiers who have very obviously been bitten, they've been beaten very badly, and they make them swear at the Russian president. I'm terribly sorry, but this is, from a very simply logical, if you take the emotion out of the equation, logically, that doesn't add up completely. I mean, when the United States goes into Syria, goes into Afghanistan, goes into Iraq, the first thing we get are pictures of dead bodies. That's how television works, especially in 2021, when everybody has almost everybody has an iPhone, and definitely everybody has a smartphone.
Well, Tatiana, we've got one body returning home. One Indian has lost his life, and that's one too many. And that's one too many for us. It's a price.
And if you remember correctly, the president and your leader have held talks, and the Russian president has reassured Narendra Modi that Russia is very, very able and available to evacuate all foreign citizens from the besieged cities. The Russian military is not going into those cities with one goal, in order to avoid civilian casualties. You don't even know whose missile and whose fire killed that Indian. And you can't prove for now, until, we know the facts. It's very easy to spread propaganda. Unfortunately, the fact remains. It's not the Russian forces who are stopping the evacuation of civilian population.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I want to ask you, India's caught between a rock and a hard place. We've lost one Indian, and as I said, that's one too many. Where do you think this is going to go? Is there any point in saying, let's not get into who's to be blamed? But the fact is, for any civilian who loses his life, the fact is that it's a war that has caused this. Why is the war happening? Who's responsible for it is a question that's very natural to us.
I started my career in the Soviet Union. And
you're on mute, Ambassador, if you can unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, thanks. Good evening, Navika. I started my career in the Soviet Union and have always had appreciation for the challenge. True, Soviet Russia was squeezed. Russia did not get its due. That's true. But there has to be a correlationship between the damage done, the cause, and the reaction. Now, is it, by any stretch of imagination, can it be accepted that the innocent people of Ukraine who were or are of the same stock, who are similar to Russian people, who were a part of Russia, Soviet Union, should be treated the way they are being treated? That Ukrainian soil, Ukrainian infrastructure should be destroyed, that Ukraine should be pounded. What is Ukraine's fault? Ukraine's fault is that it is on a geopolitical fault line. That is one. Secondly, they dreamt of a future outside the Russian shadow. Is that a fault? Now, if this is what is going to happen, then I think the civilized world that we know is going to come to a halt. If I have the power, I'll go and attack my neighbor. So I am afraid what Russia has done is aggression and nothing short of aggression. And that is something which is unfortunate. I doff my hat to the valiant people of Ukraine for the resistance that they have shown, the defiance that they have shown. And I hope that they can get their due. Now, what the West is doing is adding fuel to fire. Ukraine does not need arms. Ukraine needs boots on the ground, which are not forthcoming. Where is the death happening? Where is the destruction happening? It is happening in Ukraine. Ukraine is paying a tremendous price. Lastly, about the Indian position, I don't think that, yes, we have a difficult position. We have invested in the relationship with both countries, but we cannot defend or overlook what Russia has done. And I don't think India is a fence sitter. India has been saying very clearly that international law has to be respected, that territorial integrity has to be respected, that the hostilities have to be ceased forth. We have not used the aggression word, but effectively we are saying the same thing and advocating diplomacy, because that is the USP of India. Navika, you know, we have had 45 rounds of talks till 1917, 45 rounds with Pakistan. We have had, after the aggression of China, we have had 14 rounds of talks. So we are saying what we do, Navika.
Absolutely, absolutely, Vishnu Prakash. And that's the point, Frank Wisner. Ambassador Prakash said it very clearly. It's not arms, it's not money, it's not sanctions. It is boots on the ground. And actually, fuel to fire is what the West has done. And some amount of the cross will need to be carried by the European countries, by the United States, for bringing this situation to such a pass. Nobody's condoning the aggression, but the fact is that there has been, aggressive positions taken on both sides.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. There is no reason to condone the Russian attack against Ukraine. It is completely unprovoked to imply that political moves by the West, including the United States, have so disobliged Russia that it is forced to attack Ukraine stretches my imagination. I simply don't follow the logic. The United States and Russia, NATO and Russia, have a long list of issues. They must be addressed. There was a path to diplomacy opened. There were discussions underway. But the outcome was a Russian attack against Ukraine, while Ukraine offered absolutely no threat to Russia whatsoever. So I regret to say any implication that responsibility for this outrage is shared boggles my imagination.
Unprovoked? Vishnu Prakash, do you think this was unprovoked completely?
With all due respect to Ambassador Wisner, who knows the geopolitics much better than I do, just as he says that the US is not at fault, the point is that Russia was not Soviet Union. Russia was assured that there will be no eastwards expansion. Why is it that Russian legitimate security concerns were ignored? Why is it that Russia was squeezed? Why is it that Ukraine was led to believe certain things? Ukraine was cheered when it showed defiance. Now, there is I think we can either get into you said it, they said it business, or the fact remains that everybody has been culpable, but the challenge is that Ukraine is the sufferer, and which is the worst part, because in the big power politics, Ukraine is getting the wrong end of the stick.
Absolutely. Ukraine is getting wrong end of the stick, and in a civilized world, we have an aggression. So, Tatiana, nobody says that Russia's concerns should not have been addressed. Nobody is saying that, the West did not do what it did in terms of its own strategy. Yet, in today's civilized world of the 21st century, can we actually justify a war? Can we justify aggression? Is there, and India is an example with Pakistan. Multiple times India has sat down and talked, and there are issues between the two countries. Pakistan is a smaller country. India can always be the aggressor, but we've refrained from doing so. And similar situation since last year with China. But we've had rounds of conversations with both sides. And that's what Ambassador Vishnu Prakash says. Do you think any oppression can justify the call for war by Russia?
Well, again, you're calling it war. I'm still going to have to call it a special operation, because for it to be a war, it would actually have to be much more violent than what's happening right now on the ground. Again, there is no sustainable evidence of the numbers that the Ukrainian side is putting forward. And unfortunately, the Western world is not questioning anything in this instance, because again, driven by our lovely American colleagues, the amount of propaganda that is being put forward is just astounding. In the meantime, let me ask you,
Tatiana,
the same thing.
On the screen are destroyed bridges. There are pictures. There are pictures of ravaged cities. There are missiles. There are bombed places. There is smoke blowing out of infrastructure. I don't know what buildings they are. Even if you say they are not hospitals, but there are buildings that are being bombed. And you're saying it's not war. It's a special operation.
I'm saying that you cannot prove in any way, shape, or form that those missiles are Russian, and B, you're forgetting that as opposed to your
So you're saying Ukraine is bombing itself. Tatiana, I'm not here to prove a point against Russia or Ukraine. I'm only asking you a simple question. Are you saying Ukraine is bombing itself and these are not Russian missiles? And the whole world has got it wrong.
Again, I'm saying that you should check your images, and if those images cannot be independently authenticated, you should not put them forward. I'm saying that Ukraine is putting Grad missile launchers in the middle of populated residential areas, and we have confirmation of that. I am saying that there's been 8 years of completely unprovoked aggression in the Donbass region that was being stoked up by the United States. I'm saying that the United States has invaded almost all of the Middle East within the past decade, and nobody said anything. Nobody blocked the media. They were not in their latest intervention was in Syria, and they were not invited. The president of Syria spoke out openly, saying that the US is not invited in his country. And yet, there was no blocks, no sanctions. CNN was not blocked in any country whatsoever. I'm saying that the world magically forgot the fact that there are 13,000 dead people in the Donbass region. 13,000 that for 8 years, not a single party involved.
Tatiana Kukareva. Tatiana, I have only one conclusion from all this. And that conclusion is a very simple one. And it is simply that two wrongs don't make a right. Anybody who is a civilian and who loses his life, whether it is Russia being the aggressor or whether it is the United States being the aggressor, cannot be something that humanity can just sit back and watch. The United States
did not attack the Donbass region back in 2014. Not Russia, Ukraine, Kiev government that was installed illegally in a country after a very violent coup d'etat.
Ma'am, I can only say that when there is a bigger partner involved, the bigger partner who says the Ukrainians are their own people, then the statesmanship burden falls on the broader shoulders. And that's something that the world would expect. I'll leave it at that because I'm not running the International Court of Justice. These matters will be decided as and when these issues are taken up at multilateral fora. But for me, as a simple human being, anybody dying who's not in military, who's not in army, doesn't deserve to die. Wherever the missile comes from, wherever the bombs come from. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on debate number 1.